I've just reached a point where I can't sleep without chronic pain. Everybody that is a female will know what I mean. I mean, I don't have chronic pain, but like if you need to switch sides when you sleep, it's like we're done.
Yeah. Well, you're wearing your 39 weeks of pregnancy very, very well.
Well, I am 36 right now.
Oh, okay.
So due October 19th. Yeah, it's so funny. You know, my husband, he has delivered just short of like 2,000 calves and cows in his life. So he's like a certified delivery person for large livestock.
Yes.
So he's like, he'd probably like carry this baby if he could. But I'm like, go for it. Like you really just could take that role. That'd be so great. But he's like, you got this. It's gonna be so easy. It's just gonna fall right out. I'm like, okay, all right. Let's just chill out with
that. Frankie's attitude is awesome.
He's so chill. I can't wait till we talk about and dive deep into the topic of curses. And he's so chill. He's just like casually like, oh yeah, I sort of doused out that demon and I just didn't want to freak you out. I'm like, oh, thank you.
So let's set the table for people because I have a tendency to jump into things too quickly and not give the full setting of what occurred. And we can't assume that people actually listened to the podcast that you and I did.
Yeah.
But for everybody out there in the biocharisma verse, this is Chelsea Gall. Welcome, Chelsea. Thank you for coming back on so quickly. I think it was close to 3 weeks ago, you and I recorded a podcast where during the podcast was mainly around what you do with radionics, with bioresonance. I use the term radionics.
Yeah.
For everyone out there, radionics and bioresonance, those are synonymous terms. But it's the ability to do action at a distance using very specific electronic medium. And then your training is essentially teaching people to become sensitive enough and to have enough wherewithal within their own body where they can set themselves up for success on the causal realm. So once they start cleaning everything up on the physical, doing the enemas that you prescribe, remineralizing, going through some diagnostic work with you, what I find beautiful about your approach and your hubby's approach is that so much of how we express has everything to do with the intentions that we carry, the energies that we carry, and having the sensitivity to actually know what is going on in our environment, what signals we're receiving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. So it is really, I mean, it's such a fascinating, obviously everybody out there, you guys can go listen to the podcast, which by the way, thank you so much for having me on. I've had several of your community members and, your following reach out or email me and say, can we get a session or can we chat? Because I just really can't get on top of XYZ with my health. And so that's just been such an amazing thing. So super appreciative of that. And it's been fun to have those conversations with people and just extend on what we said in the podcast. But yeah, basically, I mean, we're all connected on a vibratory level. It's so interesting. Memphis last weekend at a football game, and we went through Starbucks. Me and my husband popped into another coffee shop because he doesn't want Starbucks coffee. So he's like, you can have your Starbucks moldy coffee. I'm going to go to this coffee shop. I'm like, fine, you do you, babe. Love you for it. And we like local coffee shop that we both know. And my biological sister, was working out in the gym next door and saw
Wonderful.
us. Yeah. So we're 3.5 hours from each other. We live far away from each other. We don't talk that much because quite frankly, I'm a lot older than her. So I'm 37, she's 24. And so my dad just sort of had her later in life, but we connect, in our adult lives. And she's like, oh, we were getting with her mom and gonna hang out with her mom at the football game. And she's like, how random. I never work out here. And I'm like, how can you deny frequencies exist?
Right.
like so that's exactly what it is. I basically have a device that harnesses these intentional signals that I can send to the body. And the environment is always sending those signals to us. So we're always picking things up from it and discarding things and trying to figure out how to assimilate information. Like we're huge computers and like you say, antennas. And I say computers, my background was in tech and marketing and algorithms and all that stuff. So naturally I'm like, oh, we're computing every piece of information that comes in. And it's just wild how that can set up depending on how we're looking at it. So in the body.
Yeah, it's really amazing. We're set up to be biological transceivers. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's so many modalities that are so ancient that actually are there. They all, you can boil it and distill everything that they say down to when your body is clean and when your body is fit and strong, you have more of a capacity to read the signals correctly from your environment. Your environment is always in a loop current with you. Like you,
Yes.
that was part of the problem that I found in Vedanta Advaita is like it's always searching the I am, like find the I am. Like what is this I am? What is this I that is perceiving all this agitation? What is this I that's perceiving vibration? But it's really funny within the phenomenal realm, you are your environment. Like you, if you were standing in the middle of a plasma stream, you would be plasma. It's just that simple. And like,
Yeah.
you know, like you have 5 kids right now when they're, you know, in a ruckus, what's your internal state? Your internal state turns into a ruckus, right?
Total chaos. Yeah. Total pure chaos. You know, it doesn't even take all 5. It takes 1. My 4-year-old literally like today, like literally with a chopstick, which was a drumstick that they were playing with because we don't have a TV. So they're like super creative, like honestly smacked me in the face, like playing the drums. And I was just like,
Mhm.
whoa. And it's so interesting how your body just turns completely from like fine to just suddenly like super chaotic. You know what I mean? You're like, whoa, I really have to operate in this. I also Frankie was telling me that so something I didn't even know. I mean, I know you do a lot of body work and you have this passion for pregnant women and you have talked about, you know, women and you did a lot of that work. And he was telling me that you believe that when you're pregnant, you're essentially like a portal, I think was
Yes.
the way he phrased it. And I'm like, I tell my clients that all the time. So when you're pregnant, you're ultra sensitive. I'm like, I don't know what it is, but you're as close to the creation process in the veil as possible. So you see this stuff arise and you're even more sensitive. So when you're pregnant, it's like, gosh, your resonance is just like 11 million, you know, times what
Yeah.
it should be, which is the most wild sensation. So.
Well, think about it. You actually have at least a double Sushumna going on when you have a living being within you. So
Yes. Okay.
the Sushumna, for those of you that don't know, that's your silver cord. That's what connects you to the Creator. And like that it's like this silver tether. And in fact, there's many modalities where you can actually feel that silver tether anchor into your sense of self. And the
Wow.
sense of self is like all the way down here in the right side of your chest. I think it even used to say in the Bible, I know the Bible has been Mandela affected a lot, but it used to say the fool's heart is on the left and the wise man's heart is on the right. And that was a reference to that your spiritual heart is just right of your sternum. Like if anybody was to say, Chelsea, who point to yourself, you wouldn't go like this. You wouldn't point to your nose.
Right.
You
You'd
would
be
go like this.
yeah.
You touch your chest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the silver cord anchors down into your chest. Well, imagine you have this little babe and it's all cuddled up inside of you and it's right underneath your solar plexus, right? And depending on what time of birth, that head is rotated. But the silver cord, it always finds its way to perfect verticality. So you have these 2 cords that are like, it's at least double strength. I think it's actually a synergistic thing that adds even more energy. I actually feel it around pregnant women a lot. I feel a real need to protect and create secure spaces whenever I'm around pregnant women. Like I feel like just my natural, like it brings the ultimate male componentry of me out, protect, provide, like just make sure that the space is right, because all male jobs are there to facilitate the one female job of having the child. That's all that there is. So
basically everything centers around that.
I love that quote from C.S. Lewis. He's like, all jobs are really there only to facilitate the mother's job,
Yes, that's so true. My naturopath used to say, like, me and Frankie would sort of see him, and then we would, ebb in and out of like, all right, we're chronic. The one that taught me about all the emotional resonance with disease and stuff like that, and how emotions are the root cause. And he'd say, well, I have one rule. He'd say this to Frankie. He would say, if mama's not happy, nobody's happy.
That's so true.
We would be like, it took us a while to just embrace the simplicity of that, because both of us were raised making everything quite complex and chaos, and like having to really get chaotic to reach an answer. But once we figured that out, it was like, oh, actually, that's pretty accurate. So
it's so accurate. So let's set the stage here. You and I did a podcast a few weeks ago. We recorded it. I released it last week. And within the podcast, like we're about an hour into the interview, and we were talking about misery, and misery loves company. We were talking about, how in Missouri, you're a native Missourian. I've only been here for about 2 years. I haven't been here that long, but I've gotten a chance to meet a lot of native Missourians. And when I was coming up in college, I met a lot of girls from Missouri. And what I had noticed throughout my entire life, and I brought this up in the podcast, is that there's something it felt like there was an oppression with the feminine spirit here in this state. And even when I would logically press, because I do have a bias, like I want the women in my life to like Missouri, so I can't say I'm neutral. I can understand my bias, right? But my main job as a polarity therapist is to get to neutral. Because if I can get to neutral and just witness what a thing is, the truth comes, then I get to see it, and then it neutralizes. Like neutral brings neutralization, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
And neutral is love, because when you're neutral, you're not pushing or pulling. You're just witnessing something for what it actually is. So during our discussion, it was amazing because a channel opened up, and it's your fault because you're a pregnant lady.
It's totally my fault. And now it's like spun into this amazing thing where I'm like, we opened this portal. What did we do?
So I'm just going to state what I witnessed during the recording, and then we can get into the events that unfolded for you right afterwards, because there's so many things that, like, all these pieces of information kind of flooded into, like, if we had 50% of the story or maybe 40% of the story, it felt like everything flooded in to kind of fill in all the gaps. So I was being neutral to this feeling, and I've been learning the biofield anatomy for 25 years. I didn't ever call it that. Actually, longer than that, if you're going to consider my athletic career. I've always had very, very good proprioception, which is the awareness of my being in space. But in the biofield anatomy, a lot of times where you feel something in your field will indicate where it is relative to you in time and space. And so you and I are talking, and I could see this old woman cursing the land. Like she was cursing the people that would be traversing this land. And I wish I was good at using StreamYard because I cannot figure out how to actually show, share screen on this, because I have all these pictures of the Trail of Tears. But I saw this woman, if you could imagine a fire and you're at a campfire and it's pitch black behind everybody that's around the campfire. The vision that I saw was this woman like sticking this piece of wood into the ground, and she's looking at me, and I'm on the other side of the campfire. So the fire is emblazoning her eyes. And I could intuitively know that her intention was that nobody would actually receive the fruits of this land. And she felt like a very powerful shaman to me. Now, this was all intuitional at this point. I don't understand language, like different languages. I don't know what people look like from whatever. I'm not making any of those claims. But what was very real for me was the fact that her intention was and she was a woman. She was like knifing into the ground, and she was like, this is like that statement, like, this is my land and you will not enjoy the prosperity or the fruits of this land. And she was like, the fire in her eyes was so intense, and I could, like, she was back here. She was in this part of my biofield anatomy, which right hemisphere of the brain behind is past female energy. So I don't remember past lives or anything like that, but it was like way, 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 way back here that I could feel it. And she still resonates there. And so we talked about this in the podcast a little bit, and we got through it and whatever, but it was like, ooh, that's kind of nutty. That's kind of nutty. And so how about you explain from your side of it, what you've experienced with women in this time relative to what we were talking about, and then what the events that unfolded from from that interview till now.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. So, okay, I mean, it probably helped me to back like all the way up, but I was born in Mississippi. My mother was born in Missouri. Her parents, like, she's like generational Missouri, like never left Missouri until her parents moved to Memphis. And then when she moved to Memphis, she went to Ole Miss, and I was born in Mississippi. And then we ended up back in Missouri when I was 2. So I am like native to Missouri, but by some act of God wasn't born here, which I think is very significant and really interesting in like a strange spiritual way. So I always say I was kind of transient between Mississippi and Missouri. But what's so interesting is that, honestly, if I look all the way back at my childhood, like the amount of little towns, especially along the Trail of Tears, that I have grown up in or been in, seem to have a lot of addiction, oppression, adultery, like just these, I mean, pharma. My big platform, if you guys go follow me or see my stuff, I'm very into pharmakia and how that operates and the spiritual side of that. And so something that always struck me with Missouri was like, okay, this is like, I used to joke with my friends in Mississippi when I found myself back here, which was a result of my crazy mother. I was like, this is the land of SSRIs. Like, this is where women go to get on SSRIs. Like, we would like joke about that because yes, there's that stuff everywhere, but like people generally had fun in Mississippi. Like, they generally would be at like football games every weekend and having fun and, connecting. And it was very family oriented. And here it was just kind of like blah, like I don't really have another good way to describe it, but it was just kind of gray, right? And very chaotic. So I've always been able to pick up on the spiritual realm. And so my mother was very oppressed. She had a lot of oppression. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, I could totally feel that as a kid. Like, we got into that a little bit on the podcast, but I would have nightmares and night terrors as a kid. Like, I would have a reoccurring dream all the time that there was a tornado and it like destroyed the area that we lived in. Like all the time I'd have this dream from like the age of 5. So that's really random. And this is where the duality is so cool. I just do not think anything is by accident. So fast forward, I stay in Missouri, end up getting married to another very chaotic tornado of a person. We'll just say that. And that whole situation was really interesting. And then we get divorced and I met my husband, Frankie. Let me tell you how we met. We met because he chased a humongous tornado and it made national news.
Nice.
Like, no joke. Like, I was like, whoa. Like, so in my life, I'm always sort of looking at these like duality instances where you're like, okay, that was really scary, but here's the restoration story. Like, God does literally like write that restoration story and use all this symbolism and all this imagery and all this stuff to bring that to our attention. Now, people experience that in different ways, but I personally have always experienced that through dreams. Like, I've always been able to dream very vividly and experience that. So some people call that prophetic dreaming, but we all know every single dream is not prophetic. It can actually be quite demonic as well. You're just literally in a different realm or state. I would love to talk to a dream expert at some point, but basically, so he ended up sharing with me when we met, and this is at this point I'm an adult and I've just seen people in my adult life. I have no clinical data to back this up like I do now. Like I'm just kind of like living the dream. And he tells me that him and his ex-wife, so he was married before, he was really into collecting arrowheads, and the land that they lived in which is just 30 miles south of us now, was a burial ground. And so he's like, oh, randomly, our neighbor told me that all of those people cursed everything behind them. So, and some crazy stuff happened at his house. Like, they had like a master bedroom mirror blow off the wall, like, and shatter, just like crazy stuff. They had a female demonic entity throw a rock through their master window, like an actual like rock. And he was at the time, my husband wasn't even kind of like leaning into the spiritual. He was just like, that was wild. He's always been able to pick up on that, but he was kind of coming out and dealing with like religious nature. And so it was quite interesting. And we were talking about that and I was like, whoa, wild. So then fast forward, we get married and I start living on their land, the farm. We moved down there and I developed like extreme chronic illness. Anxiety was on 2, antidepressants or SSRIs to even survive there. Like, I just always felt so much oppression there. And it was so weird because everything was really good. Like, I mean, our kids had a bunch of land and a sand pit and it was wonderful. And they thought Frankie worked in heaven across the street with all the equipment. Like, my son literally was like, oh, that's so fun that he gets to go play all day. Like, everybody was like high vibing besides me. I'm like, and I just found myself trying to figure out how to come out from under that. And I ended up like really getting convicted that we needed to move, like super convicted. I was like, we need to move. You need some space from this place. I need some space, like Holy Spirit wise, we need to move. And sometimes everything on that sounds really crazy, but I'm like, just trust me. The Lord will provide. I'm leaving, I'm moving. So we moved north of where we live now, which is literally the dead middle of the Trail of Tears. So
yes.
I was just telling my husband the irony that now he will cold plunge in literally our Trail of Tears lake and, out to that state park. Across the Mississippi, just near here. So anyway, I just think it's such an interesting correlation. So I'm fasting forward through a lot of details, but basically what happened is me and Topher opened this portal, if y'all want to call it that. And I haven't had a dream, any kind of dream, either scary or otherwise, since we moved from that property. Like, I just don't, I'm more relaxed in my sleep now. Like, I just don't dream. Like, I used to have tons of dreams like that and just that would manifest like that into sheer chaos. And the other night we are laying in bed and I had this dream that is still so vivid in my mind. I was with myself and my daughter, which I thought was really interesting because it was all females. Like nobody else was there except for, I know my husband wasn't even there. And I had been like put into this wooden sort of jail. Like it wasn't a jail like the Wild West, but it was more like a public square kind of, which somebody on this podcast might know what I'm talking about and have a name for it. But it was like a nailed together wooden structure with like wooden cages in it, like public square type thing where they would put people to, I guess, public speculate fighting, kind of gladiator-ish, but more like Wild West, right? And there was a female in charge of this situation, and she's like, there were 5 other people in there, and she was like, in the morning we're gonna let that one out and he's gonna beat you to death. And I was like, what is the fuck is this dream? like excuse my language, but I was like, whoa, like this is the most random dream. Like I can recall these details. So in the dream, my daughter is like screaming, like, I'm not ready for you to die, like literally screaming. And I woke up uncontrollably crying. Like I was like uncontrollably sobbing, and it was just wild. And so I just went upstairs, got a glass of water, could not stop sobbing and crying. And I was like, man, I'm just experiencing all these tears. Like, this is so random. And Frank, of course, was upstairs and he heard me, and he comes in the kitchen. He's like, he's like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? Like all this stuff. I'm like, I'm okay. I just had this dream. It was so scary. It was so wild. And he's like, he said that I looked like pale and looked like I could not process anything, like sort of a blank. Like he's like, I kind of didn't even know that you were awake, to be honest, but I was obviously standing there. And he can douse, which if you guys don't know what that is, it's an energy clearing modality. So you're basically just dowsing for clearing, like you're using the Holy Spirit or, you know, what you believe in as the creator, and you're clearing energy that is negative from your space. And so he doused and was like, brought Jesus into the jurisdiction. He's like, I didn't know this, but he's like, okay, I brought Jesus into the jurisdiction. So he told me that he just kind of said, like, in the name of Jesus, you have jurisdiction here over our property. And he didn't even tell me that because I was in such a distraught state. And no lie, 8 footsteps walked across our roof, like our ceiling. And that's we wild. Both, yeah, like I was like, okay, I was like, that was a human. And he was like, no, it's probably just an animal. Like, and I was like, no, raccoons are scratchy. I'm going to need you to go look in the crawl space and make sure there's not a human that is in our attic. And he was just like, he said, this is after the fact in the morning. He was telling me, he's like, I didn't want to freak you out or gaslight you and tried to stay very neutral. But he's like, that was easily a 150-pound woman. I'm like, 100% that was a human being, you know, that left our property. And then he stayed up and I went back to sleep. And he's like, I continued to hear it for 2 or 3 hours, just getting further and further in the distance. So like footsteps walking away from our property, which it was wild. Like we both heard that. And then he also like prayed in the Holy Spirit and was like, should I look in the crawl space? And he's like, I muscle tested a hard no. Like I was not going to look up there and see what I might have faced. So he's like, no, right. I'm just going to sit here and calm you down and go back to bed. And I found it so interesting because then it hit me. And of course I processed this. And then I'm telling a few friends, I'm like, who are really fun naturopaths of mine, which I mean, I can stop if we want to talk about that a little bit or tell you like what came next. But a couple of my friends, then they bring up all this German new medicine and territorial conflicts and how you can pick this stuff up. And I was just like, oh my goodness, it just all fell into place. Like there is some oppression in my life right now. And ironically, it's being female driven by my kid's stepmom. I won't go too many details because I kind of protect their story. But basically, as a random act, she sort of ramped up this war against me as a mother. So it's like really been challenging. And random. I'm like, well, random. Okay, so coincidental. now we know coincidental war, right? And just the timing. I'm like, I knew it had to do with being pregnant and just the healing that I've gone through and just all this stuff. But it's just been so fascinating to then watch her and try to then, for lack of a better word, steal. And I'm not saying that as a victim. I'm saying actually physically take off our property and take and claim and make claims and say, I'm the mother to our daughter. Like, I'm like, wow, that is so wild. And that is some, and I kept saying that's witchy. Like, I mean, I would say to a couple of my friends who I was kind of processing with, I'm like, that's just witchy energy. There's no other way around it. It's just a witchy energy that I cannot put my finger on. Well, now I'm like, my finger's on it. Now this is what this is, right? So thank you for the unlocking, the aha, the key, because I was like, oh my gosh, I just cannot put my finger on what this is, because it was just so freaky to go through. For and just put some context to that, I've been divorced for 10 years. My daughter isn't even, she's 16, so she can choose where she lives. This isn't something that would angle towards court or that would have an end game like that. This is something that's just purely emotional distress. And so we were even more confused by the onset of all that stuff.
Do you mind if I interject just real quick?
Oh, please. That's part of that. That's that.
So the night that you had that nightmare and you had that vision, I'll say it's more of a vision, because the way I can tell where a person is with things is when they describe it. If it's strictly their imagination, I can't see it. But one of the skills I do have is if somebody's coming from an authentic point of view, when they're describing what has happened to them in the quote unquote dream or imaginal realm, let's just call it the liminal space, I can actually see it. And so as you described it, I could see it.
It was totally that. My daughter was in the same dance clothes she was wearing that day. It was so vivid. Like, it was an actual manifestation of reality. It was wild.
Yeah. So I trust that. I've learned to trust that the last 20 years. It's like, oh, that's a real thing. So during the day the night that you had that vision, during that day, I was at a local mill that had caught on fire from lightning. And okay. I was talking to the mill owner, and the mill owner, and then the gentleman I went with to go pick up all this wood. They literally had a fire sale because the mill had caught on fire. He was going through this rundown of the curse of Missouri. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, it's very odd here, but like whenever big money comes into Missouri to, like, you know, essentially convert the natural capital, whether it's wood or soil or cows, like Frankie's stories with the cows, there's always something that trips up the works.
Wow.
There's always something that doesn't allow the abundance to like be fully realized. Like, a case in point, we were at this mill, huge mill. They've been milling hardwood floors for God knows how many years. It literally caught on fire from lightning striking. Wow. And they had to, like, the building's shot, and they have to, like, build a whole new building, and they had to sell all their stock because it's, like, you know, next to worthless. Okay? It's things like this in agriculture, in like anything where you're receiving the fruits of the land. There's like this little, like, this tick. Like, my wife hates ticks, right? So we'll be outside and it's beautiful out, like perfect temperature, blue skies, everything. But then the tick comes. You know, and yeah. I was telling Mackenzie this whole story, and she's like, "Did the shaman? Did she create alpha gal? You know, the tick-borne disease?" I was like, "It might have." So that day, I'm talking with my friend Adam, and he's like, "Yeah, you know, the Trail of Tears came through here," and he's pulling up all these maps, and he shows this one map going right through the city that you live on, like right on the Mississippi. And then the other one was essentially going through 60. So like both of them triangulate down in this cut that goes straight through Springfield and then down into, northeast Oklahoma into this area called Tahlequah or Tallulah. I don't know how you say it. But that was like the main Trail of Tears through here. And I'm talking to Adam and I'm telling him, I'm like, as I'm talking about this shamaness, she comes into my vision again, but this time she knows that I'm aware of her.
Okay.
Now, to give you a little background, one of my best friends is a shaman. Okay. I am a non-linear thinker. I see this experience that we're in as being holographic in nature. And if it is holographic, when you understand the science between with what a hologram actually is, it doesn't necessarily mean that experience is linear.
Right.
So you can have non-linear interactions. And the shaman that I'm very close to and have been close to for many, many years, he's a fellow person that had a near-death experience in his life. And he and I can kind of have this subconscious, I shouldn't call it subconscious. We have like an intuition around each other where we both just kind of know what we're thinking. It's not like this psychic thing where like I hear his voice or he hears my voice or anything like that. It's just on an intuition level. We know, like it's like words aren't even necessary. And he shared with me in the past that he receives guidance from his former self from a few hundred years ago and his future self. And they all interact through this stream in the land where he lives. And that's why he's on that land, is so he can receive both his inheritance from his past and give to his future. Like that's what he's doing. And so I'm open to the fact that you can have what would be considered non-linear communications. You can receive, like we're talking about radionics, like you literally do work on people at a distance.
Yeah.
With what's essentially just a digital voodoo, a digital voodoo box. I mean, that's what it is. Right. So you're attuned to this too. So I'm talking about this woman and I'm just telling Adam because I know the shaman signature. Because what makes a shaman isn't that they're good or bad, because you have many, many evil shamans or anything. What makes a shaman is that they use the earth, they use the matter, the mother, as their signal strength. It's a lot like what Tesla did. Tesla said, why broadcast all this stuff through the air? Like his Wardenclyffe Tower went 120 feet in the air, but it went 360 feet in the ground. A lot of people don't know that. And he had these massive, like they look like if you were to take an organ from a beautiful church and flip it upside down and then drive it into the ground, 300 feet, he had that in the ground. His whole thing was that you actually transmit the signal through the ground. Like that's the way you do it. Well, that's the way shamans do it. In fact, if you I'm not here to ruffle anyone's feathers when I say this. I'm just saying this as somebody is decently well read. When Buddha wanted a witness for his enlightenment, he touched the ground and he said, as the earth as my witness. There are so many different, like we talk about earthing all the time. We talk about all these things where the earth is the source of our matter, our mother. And like we already spoke about, you as a mom, pregnant mom, you have this secondary portal action that's opening and it's just like all this juice. Well, I'm describing this shamaness and she comes in strong and then I get a secondary signal And the secondary signal was what her vindictive side was towards the blue eyes. She noticed like her thing, like what she was noticing in me, and where she was like, where her ire went was, oh, it's the blue eyes. It wasn't that the people were white that were taking her land. What she like, because she had this long brown hair with a little gray in it, and she just had these like dark brown eyes, and she was like, and what she was anchoring into the land was like, oh, blue eye, you're not getting the fruits of this land. And like she was like that, and I just gave the jurisdiction to Jesus, just like Frankie did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't feel any fear in my body at all. And so for those of you out there, you and I didn't talk that day.
No,
at all. I was having this experience independently a couple 100 miles away from you, or 120 miles away from you. And you know, just with my bro, and my bro is like, dude, look at the Trail of Tears. It like goes right through my farm. And I was like, ah. and then that night you have this vision of being encapsulated in this like wooden, you know, this holding, having like yeah, having almost like a sleep paralysis event, and then having to work your way through that, and then hearing the footsteps.
Yes, it was pretty wild. And it was like, I found it really interesting too, that it was like sort of a public scenario. So weirdly enough, I've had a dream that was similar as well. So I had this dream when I was really deep into the Christian religious side of it. So I'm like into Jesus and essence of Jesus. But when I was into like, we're Methodists and this is it, and like the literal King James that's all there is. I had a very similar dream. So I had a dream that I was put into a cage in Benton, and there were 5 giants, and that me and a couple other, all females, which I find really interesting, had to like fight them in this cage. And like people could like come and watch, which I found so interesting. I'm like, that is just so interesting. And in my own mind, you know, before, you know, I really did any digging, I was like, okay, earmark that. That probably means I'm going to slay some giants. Wonderful. You know what I mean? Like I kind of had a separatism in that. Now I'm like, oh no, that was real live in action time travel event where, you know, it was way bigger than that. And I think, okay. And it just brought all this stuff full circle. I also did not know that, and I mentioned this on the podcast, like, so Frank has went out and trained with a dowsing specialist named Raymond Grace. So if for those of you guys that don't know, you can look him up. He's a like renowned specialist in dowsing, but he doesn't subscribe to like the American Dowsing Society. He like you, Topher, has a literal shaman best friend background. Like he's into that as well. And from like a Native American standpoint. So most of what he does is talk about what the Native Americans do. So he's very interested in their anger, the stuff they've carried, like how they did spirituality. That's kind of his background. And he flippantly mentioned last time Frank was out there that I think Frank had asked him a question like sort of like, oh, why are the Native Americans so oppressed? Do you think some kind of question like that? And he said, well, they cursed everything behind them. So when they left or were relocated or forced out or whatever, you know, took place on the Trail of Tears, that's what took place. That they cursed everything behind them. They cursed the land behind them. And this is coming from actual generational, the population that this oppression happened to. And so I found that really interesting. And Frank said, oh yeah, Raymond mentioned to me that, you know, along the Trail of Tears, all of that was cursed as they were walking. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And now all this is coming up. And he also said, something interesting, that most of the travelers were women and children, because most of the men were killed or persecuted or for fighting for their jurisdiction or their land. So a lot of the people who were relocated were actually women and children, which I find really interesting. I mean, that's the stuff that Wikipedia doesn't necessarily really tell you, but he said the majority of that population was women and children. So I was just so fascinated now that all this has come full circle. And it's so funny you say that this shamaness that you see in your vision has this sort of claiming, right? Like, this is hers. I'm not gonna give this to anybody else to enjoy and all of that stuff. And the next day I'm talking to my friend and she says, oh, I'm on, and she's a female, lives in St. Louis, and she's a naturopath, very gifted, intuitive as well. She's like, I was actually just doing a German New Medicine course. For those of you guys who don't know what German New Medicine is, it's basic. I'm sure so many of you on here do, but it's basically the correlation between conflicts that arise that are healing, releasing conflicts, and what emotions they tie to, and what the trauma, it labels the conflict of trauma. So if you had a scare conflict, a fright conflict, if you had, something stolen from you, that would be a territorial conflict. So she says, I'm on this presentation and I'm just listening to him talk about territorial conflicts because it gets even better. So the next day, my son, my 4-year-old, he's at his daycare or his in-home nanny, and he has never had an accident since we potty trained. And that day he was just so frustrated, so angry. We picked him up and I told her, I said, since this whole dream scenario and all this, my life has been so weird. Like, I've had like bowel issues, like I've had all kinds of stuff sort of surface that, I tried to releasing. And she's like, oh, I couldn't help but think about your son the other day. He had a really pretty serious accident and he had diarrhea on the way home. And it was like this big release. Like, I picked him up and he was just like, blah, from the whole day, And so we get in the house and I was like, weirdly enough, that's also happening to me. And she's like, well, at the minute she said territorial conflict, I was just like, oh my God. Like, I could not figure out what that might be manifesting in my own life. But I was like, well, somebody has actually physically stolen my children. And then I was kind of in the middle of trying to figure out what moves to make and what strategy to do and how to move through that. And then it literally hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, the vindictive chaos fighting strategy, which sometimes sounds so good, like attorney up and all this stuff, right? Like, it sounds like it's going to be productive. Never works. It never wins. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to use the children as toys. I'm not going to start another territorial conflict. I'm going to actually just keep peace here and bring in literally the Holy Spirit and Jesus back into the jurisdiction. And I mean, instant bowel issue resolve. Like, I'm talking instant. Like, I did not have any more, diarrhea, and everything was perfectly fine. And I just find that so interesting how we can just manifest this stuff all the way throughout our entire being and bodies, right? And how we so often are quick to dismiss it. But this whole curse thing that's come up has been completely wild for me.
Yes. Yeah. I want to explain a few things from just a manifestation perspective. And when I say manifestation, I'm talking about the physical embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
During our pod, we talked about, like, the material realm is just a spiritual condensate.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is. It appears solid, but in reality, reality is actually eternal. This is the temporal realm. So when you have Jesus, like the Christ, say, you're in this world, but you're not of it. He's saying you're having a temporal experience, but you are of the eternal essence. Mm-hmm. That's what you are. So in in this realm, mother, matter, they have the same root. They have the etymology, because the mother, the feminine energy, is that which concentrates. It pulls energy into itself. It creates a condensate. So that secondary portal that we're talking about that enters when you're pregnant, that's literally what's happening. Spiritual condensate into materium, and now you have child. So this energy, that's why they call, Gaia, Mother Earth, and all this stuff. It's because it's matter. It's physical. It's like actually it's concentrating the male essence in the Native American lore, not only in North America, but also in Central and South America. They have a saying. They say Mother Earth and Father Sky, because the sky is the male energy. It's big and expansive. I have guys always telling me how grounded they are. And I'm like, you're full of fucking shit. You're always dreaming about the next thing you have to do, and you barely spend any time. Like, you're always on to the next. That's Father Sky. That's the patterning of the matter. It's a totally different energetic thing. And I try and explain this in polarity therapy, that men and women are just different species.
I feel like I've just gone through about 12 years of relationship counseling with that one statement. I'm literally like, it's so funny because I'm constantly trying to, like not make my husband play small, but in not understanding that, because I truly hadn't understood that until this very moment. I'm like, he's always trying to be like on to the next thing big out there, thinking of how to keep going. And I'm always trying to be like, let's root down. Let's, let's do this. Let's get real down in this. Not like, oh, we're getting into like the poverty down. I'm talking about let's ground, right? I'm always grounding everybody out. And he's always kind of the one that's put like pushing everybody into that further space, like into the capacity of like, we can do more. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the role. We both need each other, but we're different species.
Yeah.
And I'm always trying to tell men to shut the fuck up, especially because they don't listen to women. They're always projecting their BS onto women. They don't, like most men, and I'll say this, I'll clarify, most immature men, which would just be considered a boy, no matter what their actual chronological age is, they don't understand that their energy is always pushing out. This is Father Sky. It's always pushing out. So it acts like a force field. Men go out in the world and provide and protect because we literally have a force field around us. It's always pushing out. It's always pushing out. We're not supposed to be this hypersensitive condensate. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be like, okay, the elk are over on that hill. It's going to take us 6 days to track them, and like that's the male energy. That's the male mind. It's always out, and it's out there in conquest. The female energy is concentrating that energy into matter, into the mother. And so women, they seem a little bit crazier because they're more sensitive. Yeah. The one thing if you were to take the word crazy out of the lexicon, you could substitute it with hypersensitive.
Yeah.
Literally every neurotic woman I know, and neurotic, by the way, I'm neutral when I say neurotic. I don't have a negative connotation. Every woman that is neurotic or is presenting neurosis, they're hypersensitive. They're hypersensitive because of a trauma. They've been polarized a certain way, and they're receiving too much data. And all the data makes them seem squirrely. It makes them seem like they're ungrounded. But guess what? They're the fucking grounding rod. That's why the energy is going through them. All the information, energy is information. It's going through them into the ground. Women are the portal into the matter, into the mother, into the ground. That's what it is. That's the literal thing that's occurring. So it's nuts. Like I reached out to a bunch of men in my community and I was like, I'm going to have an uncomfortable conversation with you and your wives. Because I kind of figured something out. Because my role with my community is I'm here to relieve stress. I'm here to like actually get people to get in correct jurisdiction with their creator so that they can feel the peace that passeth all understanding. That's my role. I'm clear on that. I know that. That's why I'm here. So little mysteries that come up like, oh, there seems to be a curse. And this curse is affecting the women specifically because this was a feminine shaman. She grounded her intention into the ground, just like Tesla. And she set the signal through the energy of the feminine pole. And so the women that traverse this land, whose feet touch this land, they could have all the male logic in the world of being like, oh, this is beautiful land. My husband's crushing this. Their male mind is like, this is great. But their feminine essence is like, in Missouri, it's in misery. It's like it can't touch joy. That's what it is, because this shaman knows this. She was just it was amazing to feel the thread, like her level of consciousness with this. So her time is over. You know, we physically are incarnated now. Yeah. We have the capability to take the jurisdiction. This is a call to the women of this area to cut whatever tie. Like I was telling this to my wife and she flat out was like, well, I didn't give her consent to rule my life. And my wife is, you know, very much into the law. And she's just like, if I don't give consent, this woman has no say in it. But I have seen that there are contexts that people will play out without them even knowing that they're playing it out. Like I'm not under the illusion that I know everything. So it's like, oh, that's the reason why I felt that way in that space. That makes sense. Because I've been in areas where people have been murdered. But when I first had gone there, I didn't know why it felt so horrible. Like I didn't have any backstory. And then I would come to find out, oh, this atrocity occurred in this place. And here, just for all of you out there that didn't hear the podcast, what I kept hearing from the majority of women in their childbearing years was, oh, yeah, Missouri's beautiful and great. People come here for the beauty and it's yeah. And then almost inadvertently by the end of the paragraph that they're speaking, they're like, yeah, I can't wait to leave. I like, they're always like, there's a scatter of like, yeah, I can't wait to get out here, or I couldn't wait to leave, or yeah, I really need to get here. Like there's like literally like I could hear the program was like,
yeah,
I can't be happy here. I need to leave. I need to bolt. And that's that's the energetics I would feel when I would touch these women, is this discomfort of like their physical essence actually being here. And it would manifest in things like ticks or too many flies or whatever. And I'm like, man.
Yeah. Which you can honestly program your body to not even resonate with, which I wouldn't have known that. I do find it interesting. I want to get your thoughts on this. So it's so fascinating to me. I have felt this. So in my previous marriage, which look, I mean, we all know that things could work and they can't work. That's a series of choices, right? But it was so interesting because the one overwhelming thought throughout that whole thing, and I'm not saying that was due to other person, I'm saying my thought was like, I could like stand on my front yard in my, you know, have it all reality, which we all know that I didn't have it all, but I'm saying, just like you said, you know, provided for, maybe not emotionally protected, but, you know, provided for, and, you know, and literally think, why don't we just move to France? Why don't we just disappear? Like, that was
Right.
literally, I would say that to my husband at the time, and he would like, we were 24 also, so I'll caveat that with he's a boy, but he would say, you're fucking crazy. You know, you would be like, who does that? I'm like, me. Like, I
Mhm.
can't wait. Like, let's just pack up our kids and like learn French and eat croissant and have fun. Like, honestly, like, I hate this place. And he would be like, we have it all. Like, I'm from here. We're not leaving. You know what I mean? And then I would be
Mhm.
like, oh, it's just me. I'm like some broken import. Then, you know, what happens? I meet a serious import, someone from New Zealand who fell from Missouri. So I kind of downplayed my own importness because I was like, whatever. He truly is like in a brand new ecosystem. And the same feeling. Like, I remember thinking, and all was truly great there. There was more connection. You know, Frankie is a very emotionally connected person. Like, there wasn't the same core issues, but he would be like, why are you always trying to run away? Like, even if you want to move, like, why you want to move 30 miles north? Like, what problem is that going to solve? You know, male logic, sort of, right? And
Mhm.
I would be like, anywhere but this yard. Like, I
Right.
just cannot to do this yard another day. And he would be like, that's crazy. Like, that's seriously crazy. And then I even fight it and feel it now. I said on the pod that it took COVID to sort of give me at least a shred of gratitude, to like a survival based gratitude, because we do live in like a beautiful house and we have this little ecosystem, and it doesn't matter how many people tell me how much of an oasis it is, because we renovated this beautiful mid-century pool and it's really great, and you know, we love it and our kids love it. I'm like, first chance I get, I'm selling up and moving to Florida. Like, let me out of custody, I'm out. Like,
Mm.
and I'm like dead serious. You know what I mean? Even though
Yes.
I mean, I'm on Ozark blogs and I'm on things where I'm like, oh, look at this stream and lake and this, it's so cool. Like, I just remember always having that feeling from a very, very young age, a sense of like, I just need to disappear, like get as far away as possible. Right. And that
Mhm.
was my experience coming out of high school. Like, went to high school and then was like, gotta disappear, gotta get as far away from possible, like moved to New York. So obviously I didn't have the coping skills and the roundedness I have now, because you learn that as you go. The other thing I find very interesting, and this is wild to me, I want to get your thoughts on this, because, you know, my healthcare work and the work that I do, I'm very centered around looking at, well, I know the marketing side of statistics in hospitals and data of surgeries performed and all that. But the overwhelming pattern that I see come to me in my practice, and it's the pattern that I undid, was in that misery, I got very into almost like being a man, like masculine, like corporate work, like,
Mhm.
I mean, for a year, Frank stayed at home with our kids and I worked in sales. And you want to talk about a
Mhm.
marriage almost blowing up? It was like freaking wild. But I mean, and I tell that with his permission, but it was pretty hilarious. And he was like, you know, walking barefoot and doing these beautiful walks with my children and having just the time of his life. And I was like, you know, obsessed with spreadsheets and doing that whole thing. And then our sort of marriage counselor was like, well, you guys are way out of balance in your roles now. And nobody felt good. And so I find it so interesting. So, overwhelming pattern that I see with women that come to me, because for those of you that don't know, with the bioresonance device, we can do things like restore surgery, like we can restore energy of organs that have been removed, like gallbladders, hysterectomies, things like that. All the women that come to me are usually functioning so far in the masculine. And two things I want to say on that, and then I want to get your thoughts. One, I want to know, do you think that you tip towards the masculine as a distraction because you can't enjoy the feminine? Like, I want to get your thoughts on why that would
Mhm.
be. Second thing, if for people that don't know, Cape Girardeau, so the area that I live in, the town, is known for the record number of hysterectomies performed in the whole state.
That's amazing.
So we've got a rural community of 40,000 people, services a 2-hour population of 128,000 running day to day. Then by running, I mean, if you live in a town of 2,000, your hospital is our hospital. So we're the biggest city between Memphis and St. Louis. So we're kind of what you would consider like a hybrid RHC, which is rural health establishment. So now I'm getting very nerdy into the marketing, but basically we service a big population of women, but also so small. If you looked at St. Louis compared to like Barnes Jewish, who does, 100 pacemakers a week, we're tiny, right? We're like tiny fish. So picture all the women in this area are ripping out their female organs daily. Mm-hmm. Like I'm talking in mass, like, because one, the hospital's bonus, the surgeon's bonus for Da Vinci robotic surgery. That's a whole pharmakia conversation. Two, it's like routine though, that these women buy into it. And we're not talking about women that are like, have a manifested cancer or something like that, which I still don't think you should, that a hyst is your solution. So I'll be careful not to say that for the women on here and men, because you should encourage your wives that there's a lot of steps before you have to rip out an organ. And you guys can, look at some of my work or the podcast on that. But I find it fascinating that every woman I know that has had that was kind of gaslit into it. Like basically, I know women who've had 4 completely healthy kids, but as a weird preventative and just mental fear, rip out their organs. I have 2 best friends now that just got off of hysterectomies. I'm like, wow. And the complications are crazy. And so I'm like, wow, it's so wild. I'm bringing it up because it's such a chronic problem, and it fascinated me for the last 2 years. It's been like the bulk of my work. I'm like, I feel like it's my duty, like you and the men in the community. It's like my duty to save women being women, because I'm like, it is so fascinating. The spiritual, I think, pharmakia connotation to that. Speaking of curses, so.
I totally think so. This is what I've noticed a lot, where ground is difficult. Well, let me back up a little bit. So where I have lived most of my life was over paramagnetic Earth. Paramagnetism mirrors the moon. The moon is paramagnetic. So paramagnetic means it resists a magnetic field in all directions. That's what paramagnetism is. So the moon has been likened to the feminine energy because it is very phasic. The moon every night is a different shape. Mm-hmm. And the moon itself is paramagnetic. It kind of like is like at the whim of the environment. Men are more diamagnetic. So men, like Father Sky, like we were talking about before, they'll have a vision of something, and like it doesn't matter what's happening to their body. They'll just their body will be destroyed on the way to get their mission done. And this is what I've had to overcome in my adulthood. Is I was a pro athlete, but I wasn't really a pro athlete. I just had a very strong will. And so my will put me in arenas where I was like outclassed by much bigger, stronger, faster people. But my willpower was such that I was able to succeed, but my body took a toll. A little 5'9" white guy isn't supposed to be running around with big black dudes. Like that's not smart.
No.
But that's the diamagnetic thing. I had a focus, I had a goal, and I was going to do it no matter what my body was. And in a lot of ways, that afforded me the opportunity to let my consciousness kind of detach from my body. Like I didn't make my body an idol. Because a lot of times when you don't realize your full physical potential, especially as a man, you have a tendency to idolize the body. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you'll live in the past and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But the energetics of the diamagnetic energy is very male. Paramagnetic is very female. So most of the land that I've lived on in my time on this earth has been in paramagnetic spaces. South Florida, it's a coral shelf. You know, it's over tons and tons of quartz.
Wow. Yeah.
You're essentially just living on the water. You don't even know it. That's very paramagnetic. Where I lived in Michigan was paramagnetic. Where I lived in Central America was paramagnetic. These areas that had just tons and tons of red clay. Here in Missouri, it's diamagnetic. We're on the Laurentine Shelf, I believe, and this is like the most limestone. It's the oldest rock shelf that's known in the North American continent.
Wow.
So it's very, very old limestone. Like there's tons and tons and tons of limestone quarries here.
Yeah, they mine limestone right by my kid's high school. Like truly blow it out of the ground and just ship it everywhere.
So that's a diamagnetic current. So that diamagnetic current is the reason why the women here have to present as male.
Ah, okay.
It's not a feminine energy.
Got it.
And that's why the shaman, because the shamaness, she wasn't acting in the female capacity. She was acting as a male protectorate.
Yeah.
She even had her, like, she had this piece, I think it's locust wood. I don't know for certain, but it's a very, very hard indigenous wood here. And she speared the ground. Men are the one who spear. She was in that, like, no, this is my space. And, you know, the gentleman that you brought up, Raymond Grace, I believe he was with his shaman line was with the Cherokee. And I've come to find out that the Cherokees were run by the matriarchs.
Oh, okay.
It was a matriarchal, you know, they would have a chieftain, but it was the chieftain's, you know, feminine cohort that ran things. And it makes sense in this area of the world, you know, because the Cherokees, they came all the way from the Appalachians and they were forced east.
Yeah.
So, or excuse me, forced west, excuse me. So that energetic body, like she was presenting, like she wasn't presenting as like, you know, the feminine, I'm going to adapt and overcome by mating with Blue Eye. She wasn't doing that at all. She was like, you know, F you, this is my land and you're never going to experience the fruits of it. Or that you're never going to, because there's in the Christian tradition, what makes a demon is it's a disembodied spirit of the Nephilim. That's what makes a demon. And what makes them so ravenous to enter human bodies is they have all this desire, but they can't experience it. So they need a body. They need to get into a body to be able to experience the satiation of the desire being fulfilled.
Wow, like the indulgence of like the life experience.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. Well, that would make sense why so many people who are demonically, and I don't throw this word around lightly, but I know people, including people in my family line, who literally have demonic possession because I've seen and manifested it, or I've seen and countered it, right? Or exited out from under it. It's so interesting because usually those people are addicts, extremely reckless. They function like that, right? They're overindulgent to so many things. They shop or eat or whatever it is, you know, like that's pretty wild.
So what I've seen so far being here is that I'm not a good person to get a unbiased view of things because I'm always coming in as an outsider and I usually hang out with outsiders. I usually am never like in the clique of the origin of like whatever that, you know, indigenous population is. In fact, most of my life, I'm very aware that I feel almost zero kinship with the indigenous of any area. And
It's a problem.
Like I'm always riding the fence. If any of you have ever done human design, I'm a 6'2". Like I'm like on the fence, just watching everybody as the hermit role model. Like I don't identify much with anything, and I really don't identify with pride in, like, people having very earthly jurisdictions. Like that's not my jam. So I know that about myself. So I don't claim to know like what the majority of people are going through, like the indigenous. But the reason why this was striking to me was I was noticing whenever we would go out to dinner, we'd strike up conversations with the waitresses. And the waitresses were all, let's just say, between 20 and 30 years old, and they all had lots of kids.
Yeah.
And they would all, so that seems very feminine, right? That seems like, oh, they're having babies. That's super feminine.
Oh yeah.
But like you said, there's almost like a negation of like the ownership of of being the full muse, like the full feminine negative pole, attractive polarity.
Yeah, the full like mother role, the grounded
Right.
mother role. I mean, it's funny because I could say that about myself. Like I'm like, we're on like kid number 6. And while I do think people have different roles in birth charts and all that, like I'm a Leo, I function okay in the masculine, very high in that, right? Like I actually feel good in that space sometimes. And you could probably way expand on that. But just in my limited study, I'm like, I know about my personality type that I ride that energy okay. It is so interesting though, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're still female, you crave the other, right? You crave the other, but you'll throw yourself into other stuff. I mean, people will say, "Oh my gosh, like who has 6 kids and works and has 2 companies and all that?" And I genuinely enjoy that. I enjoy that vibration. But it is very much a has been a shift. It took like 4 kids for me to be like, well, there's actually a lot of these people now, and they're depending on someone to step into that role. And I'm just being totally honest because I think honesty is just a radical thing. It's like, it was like, what I had to get to a point where I'm like, what is the point? It's like, why would God give us so much and me be disconnected from it? Do you know what I mean? Like that suddenly wasn't cute to me. It was cute for a while, but it wasn't cute. And it was also very chronic illness driven. So it was a slippery slope into an autoimmune disorder and for not fertility, PCOS issues and migraines and just all around this sort of conflict. And I'm like, wow, this conflict is very intense if you don't address it. Meanwhile, my husband, he's just vibing on with his peace state, feeling great, never has any illnesses. He's like, fully living the dream, watching sunrises in Missouri and, like, what's your problem? But
that's why I'm saying men and women we're different species.
I love it.
We really are. Like I don't, because the majority of my clientele are women. I have more of an insight into it. And the majority of my male friends that are married to these women, they're oblivious. they do not know, and a lot of them don't want to know. It's not like they have any real desire to like, walk a mile in a woman's shoes. Like that's not their bag.
Yeah.
And I really love the camaraderie of hanging out with dudes. Like I love the testosterone competitive side of things and all that. But for whatever reason in my consciousness, I've been given the opportunity to like, earn a living mainly dealing with women. And I think a lot of it is so I can actually bridge the gap and communicate certain things. I can communicate nuance to the man that's like just projecting its way of being onto things. So let me ask you, where are you at now? Like since you had this dream state, and then you heard the thing from Raymond Grace, your friend told you, gave you a little bit of background with what was going on with her. Have, in you claiming your jurisdiction and you and your husband like anchoring down, do you feel like that territorial dispute that you were processing, is that moving through? Like what's happening for you in that regard?
Yeah, one thing, it's so interesting. Like for me, I'm just like a million connections a minute with what intuitively, I mean, I can just be like, oh yeah, that ties to 8 years ago. That's what God was doing there. Like that's just my nature. And then I have a photographic memory, so I have a very, very high performing brain, like in that stuff. So it's so interesting. Like it did a few things for me. One, I was really feeling, I mean, I think this stuff happens for us in the moment, right? Like there's stuff that we work on retroactively, there's stuff that we're going on in the present. Like females have that insane gift to be having all that in their brain, whereas men are very task oriented, and they're like, oh, like I swear, when me and Frank fight, he'll be like, just tell me what I did today. I'm like, wait a minute, we're going to talk about how this tied to 8,000 years ago, right? Like every pattern every pattern from the beginning. No, but it's so funny because I personally, before this got brought up, was struggling with like a few things in my life, and hopefully I'm answering this question well. One was sort of the paralysis about what to do about this situation. So nature wise, with this custody situation and whatever, the nature is to like fight for your jurisdiction, right? To fight for your territory, to be like, this is mine and you're not gonna come up in here and challenge it, One, that's very masculine energy driven. So I have really worked the last 2 years to tap into feeling good in the feminine. And it's a struggle. Like I have tapped into really trying to figure out, because I'm a solutions driven person. Like I'm kind of like the way forward, the way you guys operate, like those are my people, because I'm like, what do we do now? Right? Let's say you can't change your situation. What's your solution? I have never thought that, oh, because I'm in Missouri, I'm just totally fucked and there's no solution, right? I just have to be miserable here. That's not my vein of thought. So what I'm always teaching in my practice is like this brain reframe around that stuff, or this allowing and this sort of one idea that if God is always working things for our good, then you're getting a gift out of where you're at, right? Like you're getting gifted, you're having an opportunity to heal. So much has sort of changed. One, there was all this residual sort of resentment and stress, or sort of like this edginess around the unknown. Because I think I told you on the podcast, and I literally share this with permission. Me and Frankie could not get on the same page in a while, and we blamed everything from Missouri to whatever. And both of us had these weird resentments around Missouri and these weird challenges. But we went through sort of resetting that homeostasis and reconnecting. But I felt like there had always been this sort of stuck thing that was like, all right, whatever it was like, okay, it's not really going away. Well, I mean, there's nothing like, having this kind of experience and then suddenly seeing and witnessing him into that role of that protector provider, right? That role that like I didn't orchestrate. And then me being in that submissive role of like, okay, like I genuinely cannot pull myself out of this space, right? Like I cannot get calm after this. So that's been a beautiful thing. The other thing is just really realizing that I don't need to participate in the chaos of having any kind of territorial conflict. And from a chaos standpoint, with getting my kids back, like I'm like, we break this in the spirit and this breaks in the spirit. And when I say break something in the spirit, if for people that are listening, I'm not being the Christian charismatic about that. I'm saying you align and you walk in peace. Like that's how it works. So my practice, I teach that all the time. I'm like, it had really convicted me that, okay, so I'll kind of try to break this down. It was like, how did my ex get this jurisdiction, right? You look at something you're facing and you go, how and where did you, as the personal responsibility, give the jurisdiction, right? And so one specific sort of incident had happened. I'm like, because you have to open that door. I do believe that the, demons and things can just be in your space and you can pick them up. So I'm kind of a mix between your wife and you. I'm not into the law, but I'm also into I'm not sure what I think about the whole can demons just get in you without your consent and all that stuff. What I do know is that we have a hell of a lot more power than we give ourselves credit for on both sides. So what was really interesting was I'm like, hey, when did we open that door? Like I've said this to Frank 100 times. I'm like, how in our marriage do we open this door? Like we were good, we were solid, and then somehow we opened a door. And I realized, I'm like, oh, I know what it was. I'm like, we both got busy with our businesses, and people who are, unstable will interpret things in many different ways. And we allowed our daughter together, so our 8-year-old, to go over to my ex-husband's house, which a lot of people might be like, what? Like, sounds crazy to let your daughter go to someone who's super oppressive, but I didn't allow it. It was actually Frank that allowed it. So what was really interesting is his mindset around it was not something that I'm upset with him about. It was something that was like, isn't this what we want? Don't we want to foster a connection? Like, it was genuinely from a good place, right? Mm-hmm. And it was something where she just innocently wanted to hang out with her sister and brother. Like, we were like, in a normal world, this would be great. In the spiritual principality world, I was like, I will never trust you again, because that opened a door, and I thought it in my spirit and then just kind of shut it down. And interestingly enough, though, after this whole experience, like, I feel like there was this restoration, because genuinely speaking, I have been like, how do you let that go? Like, how do you, out of your own will, like you say, willpower, change this situation, while also knowing in the back of my brain that you can't. You call on Jesus to change this situation. That's what happens. Like, you have to let the Spirit do what the Spirit's going to do and let stuff play out in the natural, right? So not in a punishment way, but in like, input in, input out. So I'm like, we just at this point are at the mercy of that. I realized the other night, though, through this whole experience, which some people some people sit in the place of that was so scary. Like, they'll be like, I don't want to know about curses. I want to zone out. Now I'm going to go shop at Target. Like, they want to zone. Whereas I'm the type of person that will 100% step straight into that and be like, all right, where's the healing? Sign me up, Mm-hmm. So I immediately, wheels are turning. I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, I'm so pumped about the healing, And as I'm talking to Frankie about the whole experience the next day and like recapping, I'm realizing all these things. I'm like, whoa, like, he was the one that took that jurisdiction. Like, he prayed for me. Like, I can 100% like stop this whole resentment shit about his 2 years of discovery that has actually opened my mind up past religious nature and actually bring that love back into the situation. So it has been really interesting. And he knows this. So this isn't me showing up here and like, really airing anything, just for those that might misread that. But it's been really fascinating in that front. The other thing is, I found it so interesting because it has opened up this kind of new layer into like, okay, now how do we go forward? Like, how do we help other women who might be dealing with this, couples? Like, I tell you what always happens in my practice. I only take women and children, and then I inevitably end up getting the husbands because it's like you, right? It's like you find something and suddenly there's something there where there needs to be like some forgiveness work or something like that. And so it really cracks me up. And so I'm like, all right, so if the game is family restoration, how do we now like teach people that they could be under these oppressive things that are outside themselves and actually come out from under them and be in that? Because here's the deal, like, I'm not leaving masculine Missouri anytime soon. Like, you enlightened me to that whole what that is, and it's like, I'm not leaving anytime soon. So, but the awareness is the key to the healing, right? So I say healing kind of boldly. Like, the awareness is like, one choice at a time. You just choose that that's not going to affect your life. Like, you just make one choice towards the feminine a day. You know what I mean? Or when you're faced with it, you just make that choice. Like, I find it so interesting because I never would have sort of in the past surrendered to all these scenarios. Like, I probably never, like, I would have, my initial reaction would have been to tell Frankie he wasn't doing enough or fight with my ex-husband. Like, I never would have surrendered into this sort of place of like, okay, like, where's that protection and where's that like grounding in this, right? Like, where's the peace? So I was having a real hard time accessing the piece. I'm seeing it affect our 9-year-old who's developing extreme stomach issues. I'm feeling really stressed about that. I'm like, wow, why are we suddenly getting chronic? Knowing that it's trauma that's outside of us, but also being in a place where you can't do anything about it in the physical can paralyze you for a moment. I mean, I always tell people through my long and drawn out custody battle, I 100% learned one thing, and that's how I got into bioresonance medicine, was you can shift things from afar. You do not have to be orchestrating and controlling the entire environment to make a change. And I was taught that through my custody battle. It instantly gave me forgiveness, gratitude, all kinds of grace for the situation. Like I stopped all the hate, all the stress, all the fighting, and just saw the clarity. Like, okay, wow, like we can shift things from afar, and what a beautiful thing. And it built my entire life and business, right? It freed my kids. And there was so much of stuff that happened. So, but we find ourselves back faced with that. The other part of that was I couldn't put my finger on why I was having this weird fear of childbirth, which this is my 6th time. So if there's any females on here, they will be like, what is wrong with you? Like, you've literally done that. I mean, I just did it 20 months ago, like, for God's sake. It's still right in the top of my mind. And I'm like, I'm good at pain. Like, I'm like, I can manage pain. I understand the mind deal with pain. So it's not even really pain. I was just not wanting to have the baby. And throughout the course of this pregnancy, I'm kind of sort of always still praying to God. I'm like, I know what disconnect does to a baby. I don't want the disconnect. And my naturopath was like, well, the baby's way more genius than you. Like, we can tap into the baby. Like, he can understand that you're just having like a, that you don't really believe in your soul that he's not wanted kind of thing, which I don't believe that. But head heart disconnect. Like, okay, I'll kind of be into the baby when the baby's here. Post this dream, which this is probably where people will say how heartless, but I'm just being honest. Like, post this dream, I'm now like so embracing the baby. Like, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like ready for baby now. And like, I just find it so interesting that we can try to orchestrate timing, but that I teach women every single day and men about the flow state, about the flow of life, about the fear, about in the witching hour, the perception of the witching hour, you can at any point in time see a shift. And I've experienced it over and over and over in my own life. So I don't know why I still question whether it's real, but I feel like this was one of those scenarios where this gets all exposed. My family comes out from under it. And now suddenly our next generation, who happens to be another boy, is not going to have to feel that, because I'm super into the generational sin passing during pregnancy and all that stuff. And he's not going to have to feel that, right? That doesn't have to carry on now. I'm like, okay, cool. That's done. Like, we're done with it. So super amount of gratitude in that. Do you want me to answer the question that's up here? I'm like, I see a question from I'm like, I don't want to ignore it if I'm answering it, but basically in reference to bioresonance machines, how are the frequencies determined? Several different devices program them different ways. So you have to kind of watch that. I do think there are some on the market that are, well, let's say the ones that make you pay for the updates and the frequencies, I'm not that into because I'm not sure what they're doing. But my device is programmed based on, first and foremost, the sun and the moon. So what Topher was saying, it's like the sun and the moon energy are the main frequencies that are in there. And it's so interesting when you're tackling something like a parasite, the moon frequency just activates. It's the destroyer frequency. The sun is the builder frequency. So I guess another way of saying that would be the sun's the expansive frequency. The moon is the grounded frequency, but that's what the device calls it, the provider and the destroyer, which I think is so interesting. And then it has all the Bach flower remedies. So the question says herb frequencies, but the Bach flower remedies, it has every mineral known on earth. It has over 5,000 frequencies. So it has every frequency of every plant, mineral, and it also is programmed, believe it or not, with a lot of the medication and things that are on the market too. So you can actually function from an allopathic standpoint, but I don't use that in my device. And mostly the device works off the sun and the moon. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kyle's amazing. If you ever need somebody that's with the plants, like fully, He's my French tribe.
The Tippecanoe herbs that you're talking about, because we can connect after the podcast, because what's so cool is you can actually add in and have others programmed in there. So like if somebody had a knowledge of herbs, like a provider, for example, which I'm not an herbalist, but if someone had that, the thing I love about my device is it auto selects what people need. So I don't orchestrate any of that, but you can. So you can override that function. So if somebody was a provider, you can actually program with whatever Kyle knows into the device. That way you could tailor some kind of protocol specific to your clients. I actually just use mine and use a lot of kind of color therapy. So I have the complete color card library from Ina Siegel, and tie a lot of the book, The Secret Language of Your Body, and her color, like the chakra colors in her color spectrum therapy, chromotherapy, I guess it would be. And we've recently started experimenting with putting color in the box with the person and then sending the signal with the color. So it's been super fun. You know, I'm drinking out of my lemon glass. Like we're all into color therapy. So
yeah, that's beautiful. I always love Frankie with his different color glasses that he wears and his
matching skirt, water bottle glasses. I'm like, come on, babe.
He's just styling. That's New Zealand in the house, you know. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think I told you, he's like, where were we going? And I'm like, you're gonna wear that? Oh, it was pacemaker surgery day. So I mean, I recently had a pacemaker replaced, surgery, completely awake and unmedicated. So that was wild. Talk about the power of the mind. But basically, he comes out wearing like his color therapy that he thought I would need for the surgery, which I sound so ungrateful. I mean, it was cute, but I'm like, he's like, what do people wear to surgeries and hospitals here? I mean, I'm from New Zealand, you know, you Americans, you guys love the hospital, love surgery. I'm like, babe, I'm doing the most non-American surgery that you could possibly do. So it's fine. I'm like, we're going to go like on the cardiology floor looking like the psychos, like, but it's fine. And he's like, he has on like flip-flops, turquoise shorts, nice. A turquoise shirt, turquoise water bottle, turquoise glasses, his bioharmonizer, his jade stone from New Zealand. I'm like, they don't wear that. It was, so it's a green stone. So I think it's jade. When you leave New Zealand, it's customary to get a green stone. So he has like a green stone that he wears every day. But yeah, super funny, but I also super appreciate it.
So. Yeah. He's Greenstone Bear. That's his whole thing. There you go.
I know he asked me the other day, he's like, should I change my bear name to something like Coffee Enema Wise? And I mean, I'm always like shooting the shit with him about having a bear name to begin with. I told you that on the podcast. I am not making fun of the bear community. So I will 100% disclaim that so I don't get shunned. But like, for sure, I'm like you, Topher. I can't root down in like an idea, like a place like that. I even feel like that about that. I'm like, I just can't have, I can't have like a bear name. Like I feel the same. I'm like, I can't stay in a Bible study. Like I've tried them all on. Like I'm like, oh, am I Jackson soccer mom? Am I like dance mom? Like who am I? And it's like, no, I'm just Chelsea Gall out here being the flow one, living the dream. No. So.
Yeah. In my totem of importance, you know, fitting in is very, very low.
Same. I will tell you, I have found such peace in like, you talk about women. Before I knew about all this, it came on my heart to stop this sort of outsider complex with women, because I really felt called by God to help women and to get connected with women and, you know, just to like be in their sphere, right? Like I was like, I know I'm like valuable and I know that I have stuff to say, but I don't know how the connection works if you're totally different than someone. And you talked about love at the very beginning. And what I realized was that like, you talk about it in neutrality, which I love. I'm going to start telling my clients that I, from a Christian standpoint, had studied the middle ground between license and legalism. So license, doing whatever you want, and legalism, having to have that extreme control to function. And then in the middle is love. And so you basically said the same thing. So I kind of like put that on my heart. And instead of really trying to connect and control or connect and, you know, just do whatever and not be myself, I realized, wow, there's this beautiful place that you can just be you, let the chips fall where they may, and appreciate people for where they are and who they are. And I mean, my God, over the past 2 years, my relationships have deepened so much with so many people that are not like me. Like I mean, my background was in allopathic marketing. So all my friends are either sell in big pharma, or they, rep pharma companies, or their husbands do that, or they're nurses. It's like, we couldn't be further from resonating, but then you realize that's not actually accurate. Like, you don't know that until you're really down with someone, and then you're like, oh, you actually think that about XYZ, or oh, you're actually very mindful of what you use in your personal care, or it's wild. It's really interesting to operate like that.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch people, I guess, react to the whole notion that love is neutral.
Yeah,
because we're taught to be extremely dramatic.
totally.
So the best way I could say it is, it's neutral because it's ordered. Like, there's no more higher ordered energy than the neutral energy, because there's no need for control. And
Yeah.
so, like, the need for control, or the need to modify, or the need to change something else, that's a polarization. That's moving towards, one end or the other. But when you can just, find that current that sponsors you, that is completely neutral, that energy, when it gets to witness other, it orders it. It always creates an upregulation. So
That's so
there's no need to try and make somebody better. Like, a person in ego has to know that when it's trying to improve a situation or make somebody better, like, especially in interpersonal relationships, I'm not talking about, like, fixing something physical.
Yeah.
But I'm saying with an actual other sentient being, it's not for you to ever be the savior of other. That's not any of our roles.
Right.
Our role is actually to bear witness for the creator, and that's loving them. Like, that's literally like the love, but the love isn't a romantic love. The love is seeing that being as it is, and knowing that as it is exactly as it should be. And
Yeah.
in that recognition, there's no need for control. There's no impression that's happening. There's nothing that's being pushed upon that being. And then when that being gets to feel the freedom of being witnessed without this other impression, like trying to get it to bend to its will, it ends up upregulating. It always ends up getting better.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It's a weird thing. And that's the thing is, like, as a being is getting better, it can present sickness because it has all these things lodged in it that need to express.
Yep.
Like, express means to push out.
Yep. Quite literally detox. Quite
Exactly.
literally. It's really wild. I mean, I told a client, most my clients all get kind of a personal WhatsApp chat with me because I work so much on the mind body thought processes. I'm like, hey, if you're struggling with something, I need you to text me and tell me. And I just had a client that went on a trip with her mom. Like, it's like a simple basic example, but she was like, I don't know how to act on the trip. Like, we're going for this, we're going for that, like, we're going to, and I don't want to tell their story, but I'm like, what if on the trip you just connect with your mom? You don't focus on any reason why you're going. You don't focus on any wanting to hear why you're going. Like, I mean, no symptoms. I'm like, connect on just with her, like in the fun and joy vibration. Like, that's it. Like, that's the homework. And she's like, I genuinely want to remember a trip that we had when I was like very young. And I'm like, then you can like channel that trip. Like, now you don't need to bring all these other adult things into it. Just literally act like that, because kids, they just do that, right? They do that so naturally. They're like, I just want to vibe with you. I don't care what we're doing. You know what I mean? Like, it's so funny. Every day I wake up and my 4-year-old's like, I just want to be with you. I don't care what we do. He's just like, you're the greatest thing. And it's so funny. I mean, my 8-year-old doesn't say that anymore, but it's fleeting, but it's like, it is funny. But the other thing is I want to ask, so how do you think, I mean, I feel like I personally have jurisdiction now with the power of Jesus in this whole Trail of Tears thing, and such a nice enlightenment. But how do you think that we sort of just move on from that? Like, do you think people just as individuals, like now that the awareness is brought, they just come out from under that and they see how it's manifested in their own life and they tackle it? I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, it's just a matter of awareness. Like,
Yeah.
the best way to say it is, if you've ever seen something that's had subliminal programming in it, and then you're shown the subliminal message in it, it no longer has sway on you.
Not at all. I know. I've noticed that. It's like it doesn't have any power at all. You're like, oh, that's what that was. Well, that's gone.
So. Yeah. Because nothing survives the light of awareness. Like, it's back to like the difference between the eternal realm, like we are from the eternal realm, and we're down regulated into the temporal realm. So when you're neutral and you witness something fully in the temporal, it's obliterated. It goes away. It just it disintegrates.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. People ask me all the time in my practice, how do you walk in forgiveness, or how do you access forgiveness? And I'm like, not saying it like you, but I'm like, you literally decide to love what is right now, and you just walk in that right now. Like, you don't participate in it if it feels chaotic. You don't have to agree with it, right? You make your own choices. You don't play the victim in it, but I'm like, you just love it for what it is,
I wouldn't even I try not to use the word love. Like, I like how in the Christian, well, at least in the, I shouldn't say Christian because there's so many different sects of Christianity.
Yeah.
Like, within the tradition that's based on the Bible, that's the best way I could say it.
Yeah.
There is a saying that's known as like to bear witness for God.
That's cool.
The way I experience that is by being wholly neutral with something. So just because I am aware of this being that set this intention, I'm not attaching a story to it. I'm not being dramatic about it. I mean, it was kind of dramatic while it was happening. Because
because the love can be like the Hollywood version, right? Or it can be the codependency, or it can be the love that somebody was shown. I actually love that. I love that verbiage. I'm so big in verbiage, like with my clients. I freaking love that.
Yeah. So now I'm just getting back to my polarity therapy roots, where, because nothing, what I've witnessed with whatever I'm witnessing is it wants, especially if it wants to survive, it's trying to invoke polarity. It's trying to get a story. The story is polarity. But if you just watch it and you're just aware of it and you're not feeding the story, you're just looking at it. It's like, if you're ever around somebody that has a guilty conscience and you just look at them, they'll just go nuts. They'll just, they'll all their tics and all their things that they've been hiding through their story. When they can't express their story, they go nuts. And when I lived in the ashram, it was hilarious because we had literally put people in a few day silent decompression. Just so that they could shut the F up. And, some people call it Vipassana retreats and stuff like that. But I lived in that. I lived in that.
Frank actually got a pretty big healing in a 10-day silent retreat.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Because it's just like fasting. It's like a mental fast.
Yeah, it's amazing. He could tell you all about that, but he's like, they basically had to sit in, and I'm so sorry, I'm not a yogi, but they had to sit in the meditations for 8 hours in the proper posture, and weigh and observe pain and sensations and all this stuff. And when he went, he was kind of crippled, like he couldn't walk. And he thought he had been the chiropractor, he'd had all this stuff. We were already married. He drove to Texas, basically could barely get in the door of this renowned like silent retreat. And it was so wild because he thought it was just something from the present, but it was something from like the way back. But what really was interesting is the amount of freedom emotionally that he got. My gosh, like his like whole life, demeanor, connections, relationships, like all changed. It's so interesting once you start hiding behind that whatever you're distracting with, I guess, is like what you're saying. But it was wild. It was so cool.
Yeah, you'll come to find, like, if you're ever in the chat or in the biocharisma threads of things, you'll hear the word taco, because it was a word that I used in the ashram to denote a distraction. There was this very long Hindu word for it, and I thought people were being very pretentious when they would use it. So I just called it a taco.
I love it.
And it's like your ego, like, once again, action at a distance. We're talking about radionics. We're talking about curses. We're talking about tuning forks. Well, your larger body, your biofield anatomy, as Eileen McCusick would say, extends way past your physical perimeter.
Yeah.
And it will cause chaos if it doesn't want something to be seen internally.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So you'll see this a lot where, like, it's very well known that a lot of paranormal activity happen around young women that first go through their period and women that are having babies.
Yes, all the time. I see it all the time.
And it's because there's this energy, there's this, you're so expanded and the energy is so far out, and you're running so much, you're running generational stuff because the secondary energy is there.
Right.
Ding, 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 ding. Like, something quote unquote out there is happening just to distract you from the full process.
I have this theory. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Because one might say that all the ego is the distractor.
Yes.
It's just distracting you from knowing your real essence. That's all it is.
Totally. I mean, I have this theory. You know how, like, pharmakia, I call it pharmakia. I'm not talking about necessarily only pharma when I say that, but I call it pharmakia very purposefully because I think the inversion is the healthcare shit that we get sucked into. And we're not just talking about V words or whatever, because I don't want to get tagged. We're talking about just the all-encompassing, anything you need to seek outside yourself to suppress a symptom or to feel better. So that also includes a lot of supplements and holistics, and that has to do with timing. So I just want everybody to be clear on my view on that. But basically, it's so interesting. I have this theory. I'm like, this is why the pharmakia believes that women are compromised, vulnerable, like will literally use that same logic without the notion of, these symptoms being for the good or these symptoms being for healing or whatever, right? This opportunity to heal and face. And pharmakia capitalizes on shutting that down at all costs. And they win. They tell women all the time, like, when you're pregnant, you're vulnerable. You're the most immune compromised you're ever going to be. I'm like, that is a complete load of bullshit. I'm like, pregnant women are healthy. Like, I mean, the amount of women that come to me that are like, I have HG, I have morning sickness, I have this, I have that. I'm like, what provider prophecy do you believe, or where did you interfere? Like, did you get vaxxed, or did you do this, or did you do that, or what, are you hydrated? Like, and 9 times out of 10, people are like, well, I'm on this Facebook group that says I'm immune compromised. my doctor said I'm immune compromised. It's like, okay, well, first you need to come out from under that belief system and that lie, because 100% you're not. I argue you're immune fortified, right? Like, right. I mean, I know there's no standalone immune system, but when you're pregnant and you're having these symptoms, you're doing it because you're immune fortified. Like, your body is actually quite literally raising its vibration. I'm just now putting some study into amniotic water and all that ecosystem, and it's really, really but But I'm like, yeah, the baby's like kind of given its own world, so to speak, that's so interesting. So I find that interesting. I also can't pick up a baby on my bioresonance device. This stuff is so wild once you start to look at it, but like you cannot see a baby on the bioresonance device. So if a pregnant woman comes to me, the way to shift herself is to shift herself. The baby is supernaturally protected, one could argue, from energetic interference as long as you're on that plane, which is so cool. So you can tackle your stuff, and that they talk about babies picking up all this womb trauma and all this stuff. I believe there's something to that, but I don't necessarily believe that has to be, because babies have their own ecosystem in the body, which I find super interesting.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if we talked about this, I forgot, but I've done a lot of urine therapy.
Yeah, I know you've done it, but we didn't talk about it. I only know from my lovely husband, who told me about the Owen debate between, he was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to do y'all's coffee up my butt or Topher's urine therapy.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, and do your own urine with their coffee up your butt, and then it's all set.
Or you can do urine enemas too, just so people know. You don't have to drink it if you can't get past the mental block.
Yeah, it's so getting back to the amniotic fluid, have you ever thought of doing placentophagy?
Describe to me what placentophagy is, because I don't know. I know phagy,
So,
I'm not sure what that is.
So placentophagy is when you actually consume the placenta.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You as the mother.
I have a belief system about that. So no, it's not for me. One, because I believe the placenta belongs to the baby, not the mother. And so I actually have a whole highlight on my Instagram about placenta that kind of lays out my thoughts on that. But knowing that it's the babies, I have never felt personally convicted. And honestly, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen people say they felt fortified and really great. And then I've also seen people have hallucinogenic chaos break out. And I just don't know how I fully feel about that. So, I mean, I know it's widely done, but I've never done it.
Yeah, I really wonder. My friend, Slick Dissident, Gabriel, I don't know if you've seen any of his work. He's my biggest mind bender. Like that guy, like he's out there. And when I say out there, in a very good way, like he's riding the sensitive waves like no other. And through all of his research, he's like looking at pretty much the best way you could say it is like this little season that we're in, this inversion of reality that we're in, pretty much started when the placenta was taken away from the mother and baby. Because the way it works is it gives the baby its genetic memory, its full genetic memory. So when the mother eats the placenta, she gets revitalized by the nutritional base. It's like technically like a twin. And that heritage, that's the inheritance that's been discarded, like that it talks about in biblical terms.
Wow.
So when you don't discard your inheritance, you give the inheritance to your child, because the child's obviously nursing off of you.
Yeah.
And it's very, very well known in magical circles, people that can recall past lives, their mothers had partaken in placentophagy. They actually were eating, because you think about the level of nutrition, because I only dealt with the placenta of my one child, right?
Yeah.
But like looking at that, it was like, whoa, and I could feel the vibration of it. It's
wild. Yeah.
Like you almost have a mass that's almost the size of the baby itself. And it's just like, that's not by accident. Like that's nutrition.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's not just nutrition on like just a calorie perspective. There's something to it. So It's something that I think some of the people that are in the know do. And that's how they're in the know further, because so much of like real magic, like the magic that where you can do action at a distance through a biological organism, is a lot of times dealing with some sort of secretion or fluid from a living being.
Yeah.
And there's no greater secretion than the placenta at birth.
Yeah, I mean that's something that, I'm literally here open every day to like whatever Holy Spirit throws my way or whatever I come across, because the more I've broken out of what I call religious nature, which is the church crafted version where we have the idol Jesus that you never access or get to until later, which I don't really subscribe to anymore. The more I'm like working through that process myself, it's so interesting. I always say, I'm like, I learned something more with each baby. I don't necessarily want any more babies, but I'm like, I learned something more with each baby. There has got to be something to that. I mean, there's so much unknown and spiritual about childbirth. I could do like a 4 hour, and children and the connections and all that. I could do such a long live on that. Like, I mean, one thing that I recently dove into was well, I mean, yeah, it's somebody in the comments mentioning about hospitals keeping the placenta. I mean, we definitely keep our placenta. It's so funny though. Like the last one we kept is still in our freezer. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with it because I just don't feel any way about it. I'm like, what are we doing with it? But instinctually, it's like, keep it. I do find it interesting too that almost all animals just consume it, right? So that is fascinating to me. I'm like, okay, well, we wouldn't be that much different. So I can see the logic there, and looking at it from a nutrition only standpoint is still a disconnect and kind of like an idol. So I'm like, my eyes are more open to the spiritual side of that and exploring what that's like. Especially now that you mentioned it, it is fascinating. I'm starting to like really myself, because I haven't ever dug into it, wrap my head around things like past lives, how we're known before we're known in the realm before we get here, like really get out of that worldly tangible. I mean, I've been kind of seeking that for a year or two without orchestrating it. And what these last two babies have given me is sort of a very interesting openness and conviction to that, because I got down this rabbit hole, for lack of a better word, of miscarriage and just the whole premise behind that, because there is a big emotional component to that. So that's kind of hard for some women to hear, but a lot of times a miscarriage happens because of a rejection trauma. It can also happen because a baby's very sick. There are multiple nuances to that. So I want to be careful about that sensitive subject. But for me personally, I have found it really interesting. We have 4 kids. Frankie and I have, well, our fourth's on the way. Frankie and I have 2 kids together. 2 were planned. So Jane and Jones were planned. They're 9 and 4. And we had 2 miscarriages interim between Jane and Jones in the year of chronic illness that I was going through. And I sort of couldn't reconcile for a while how to free my body from why did it not perform kind of thing. But now I've really gotten into this mindset of like timing and how the world works, and how, okay, if these babies, I don't want to say assigned because that's a bad word, but if they are going to be yours or come and have this human experience, right? They're going to have it. If it's God's idea, they're going to have it no matter what. And so, ironically, the last 2 babies that we have, probably not ironically, but something that's been in my depths of study, is they have been unplanned, surprise babies. And the timing has been in 2 phases of restoration in our marriage. So where we had either worked through the forgiveness and the illness stuff or worked through something else. And I find it so interesting that they also are coming the same months as the miscarriages. So I'm like kind of in this rabbit hole right now of like, I told Frank the other day, I said, I might sound like a little bit of a cuckoo person to you right now, but I'm just going to tell you, like, I'm real down a rabbit hole of like babies coming no matter what. Cause I'm like, how interesting is it that this correlation that we now have these two, I mean, I would never say accident. I'm like, these two surprise babies, these two gift babies that completely unplanned, completely in timing, where we were both like, that's such weird timing. Like, I mean, one of them was like, God, we were really working through some hard marriage stuff. And I'm like, I mean, what are the odds, you know? And so I'm very logic minded, but now I'm just like, whoa. And both of the miscarriages that I had were boys. Like, we knew they were boys. They're both later. So they were both between 10 and 14 weeks, which are considered like later miscarriages. Like, you pretty much already have a baby at that point that's just very tiny. And so interesting. Frank sort of and me shut that down. We're like, all right, well, whatever. We've orchestrated this. We're not having any more. That was traumatic. Then we planned our second, 6 years after having our first. And then now we have two more that are like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, in my mind, I'm just like, I was like looking at our youngest the other day, and I was like, I just can't help but think he's so not old soul, but like he's so like been here before. You know what I mean? Like, he's so wanted to be here before. It's just so fascinating when you look at all that stuff. Like, I'm like, whoo, this is a very spiritual experience that that I'm living in. And so I'm always sort of embracing that in the pregnancy thing and open to whatever God throws my way to access higher in that, so that I can impart that to other women. And just, I find it so fascinating that, again, the first thing that pharma wants to destroy is that process, or that pharma wants to create an orchestration in is that process. It's like, okay, get on birth control, do this, do that. Like, I'm like, there's no, you can't deny the correlation there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, little Susan, it's crazy.
It is. And it's kind of cool to think the little bit that I know of you and your hubby. It's the turquoise shorts for certain.
Turquoise makes boys.
Turquoise makes boys, and clearly. it's all the cold plunging. If you want the sperm count to go down, you got to warm the pool up. All that cold water,
I'm like, my, what happened when you stepped into the masculine? My God, we've had like lots of babies manifest.
All that cold blood.
You're right, gender roles.
That's right. That's hilarious.
It's so funny.
Well, Chelsea, this has been wonderful. Where can people find your work, to give the audience where you're at? Also, tell them where they can buy your husband's lovely coffee.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll put all the links, send them to Topher, or put them in the chat. But my practice membership is housed under bioreslife.com. So BIORES life.com. So that's all my work is there. And you can book with me. You can join our family membership, which is a yearly fee. In that membership, what you get with that is you get bioresonance therapy, so acute care for you and your kids. So if you're experiencing anything like a detox, a level up, a sickness, so to speak, I can help you with frequency enhancement. So it's a pretty cool membership. We do a weekly meeting. I invite providers to come talk. It's basically a hub of everything that I come across that I think is legit in the health space, so that you don't have to have it here, there, and everywhere. And women like that, because all we do all day is like save stuff on Pinterest, Insta, all that, and get ourselves further into overwhelm. So that's where my body of work is all pulled together. And the big bonus of that is getting access to BioRes medicine. And in that, I also do intensives monthly. So if somebody is chronic or in that crisis state, we do that. We sell our coffee enema coffee, which talked more about that on the pod, and that's great. And y'all can go to our website, which is innerbrewcoffee.com. That's my husband's baby. And that has a full course you can do on coffee enemas and our green therapy coffee that we import and sell. So it has my content about opening the forgiveness pathway through coffee enemas. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's why I keep getting pregnant, just to be honest. It's like the forgiveness pathway. It's what it does for your hormones, your inflammation, your glutathione production. Like, I really believe in coffee enemas, not to be idolized, but in the way of like, they no doubt open up a liver brain pathway. So super cool therapy. Much like your urine therapy, which I pray one day I have the balls to do. My bestie does it. And I'm like, how? Just tell me how. But that's where we are. So interbrewcoffee.com, bioreslife.com. And my Instagram is where I put all my short form stuff. So at Chelsea the Chosen Mom, all my short form, quick, snappy things about lab work and pharmakia and funny content about your Bible study, etc., can be found there. So
that's wonderful. And I'm right there. It's kind of interesting. I was gonna go ahead and do an enema this last week.
I was hoping.
And then in my consciousness, because I'm kind of like this with any homeopathic remedy, half the time I don't even have to take them.
You're just like, I did it.
Like my body just started to release and release and release and release all on its own. So I'm very open that I'm not good. Well, I'm actually too good with placebo, but I'm actually going to do that because just tuning into the frequency of that, my body did clear up a lot. Like yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you, like, are we under a full moon? I'm like, the moon out my window is so full. Like, is it full moon tonight?
No, it's not full yet.
It's not fully full. It's like, it's so bright out my window. I'm like, speaking of, the best time to do coffee enemas. But I always tell people, I'm like, do coffee enemas from a place of, so I first started coffee enemas. The actual production of the enema was to get space to even have that tune in, right? So we talked about that a little bit on the podcast. And I think maybe that's easier for moms, maybe not. It depends on how packed your schedule is. I come across many males who they're wrapped up in work and family life and they coach sports and they're, as busy as females. But it's like, it's crazy. And for me, it was, my husband didn't bother me when I had something up my butt and nobody bothered me. I could get the space in the bathroom, alone. And I didn't have the space in my life to tune into stuff or to get quiet. If you can make that space, you can 100% make that release. Like, you don't have to have the therapy to do that, but it is a pretty cool way to carve out time. And, also, like any of these other tools, you're giving yourself this visual, right? You're giving yourself this, like, I did that and it feels very tangible. And some people have a hard time working in that untangible. I don't, I swear. The second that you brought up the curse and all that, and we had a pod and you told me that, oh, you could probably just think about doing an enema. I'm like, my God, the next whole day I was like releasing, I'm like, this is so I'm like, I told my son, I was like, freaking Topher. Like, he had to bring it back to my conscious that you don't actually have to do that stuff. He's like, that's so funny. I was like, no, babe, like, I almost shit my pants today.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, it was legit. He's like, that is too much information, but it's true. You can
Well, Chelsea, I'm going to always make an excuse to reach out to you and talk to you. So just get ready. I'm going to bug you. I'm going to be like,
oh my gosh, yes. This life is so fun. I'm like,
yes,
I love this.
It's wonderful.
All right. Well, you enjoy your night and everybody else enjoy their night.
Yes. You have a good one and let's stay in touch.
Okay, perfect. So to exit, I just leave studio. We're good, right?
I believe so. And thank you everybody for coming out and checking us out. This will obviously be on the YouTube live feed at BioCharisma, and I'll cut up some shorts for you guys to check this out in a shorter form content. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, and if anybody has questions, for sure, I'll get into the comments when this is over and answer them. So
yeah, okay. just hit us up with any questions you have.
Yeah, I'll answer them. I can do that with my lovely PWA. So all the medical advice you want. All right. You guys have a good night. You and your wife and daughter. Bye.
Good night.